All right, so let's take a look at a simple Redux example. So we took a look at a hello world. Let's step it up a little bit. And so right now, let's create a Redux, a React app called Counter. It'll be a simple counter, all right? It'll have 2 buttons, and one button will increment the counter, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the other one will subtract it. So it just adds just one little bit of complexity, and it's not as generic as a hello world, right? But it's identical, right? So it has two buttons. It generates 2 actions, but this one will update the state though, right? Because it needs to look at the previous state, right? And then increment it to be the next state, right? So it's a little bit trickier, but not that much. So let's go into Counter, and let's npm install Redux, save. And we'll also need React Redux in there as well. So meanwhile, let me close this application. Close project, and we'll open this new application, the Counter application. Okay, so loaded that, and let's now do an npm install React Redux, save. Okay, so while that's deploying, compiler, let's get started here. We're going to blow away our app here. So let's delete all this, and let's create our entry point. Call it index.js. Okay, and let's see. Let's load Redux. So import. First React. So React from React, and then import also React DOM from, if I can spell this, React DOM, there we go. And let's have our counter component, right? It'll be something like const counter component. It will be just it'll be maybe something like a div, and then will be h2 counter, and it's going to maybe display a count, right? And it's going to be passed in as an argument, meaning it's not going to maintain its own state. Right? Typically, you think, well, it's maintaining its state, it's adding, it's reducing, decrementing, right? It maintains, it knows where it is in the count. Well, no, again, it's not its responsibility to maintain its state. So the count will be provided to it from outside. All right. So we'll put this, maybe we'll do a break, and maybe add 2 buttons. 2 buttons that we'll do an increment, and we'll do a decrement. So decrement and increment. Yes. All right. So let's display this. Let's do npm start. npm start. Okay, so we created the component, but we never actually rendered it with React DOM. So let's render it. So we'll do a React DOM.render, and this will render the counter component in the document.get element by ID at the root. So there's our component. The count is 0. Well, it doesn't exist yet, so it doesn't render anything, and we have the decrement and increment. Okay. Since we know that this is going to be a Redux component, right? It's receiving the state from outside. It doesn't know what it is. But also, it's going to notify some reducer that these 2 events have occurred. Right? So presumably, there'll be functions that it needs to call. and we're not going to dispatch them from in here. Instead, we're going to use the mapper, right, like we did in the previous example. So we're going to be talking to the outside world through functions such as increment, right, and decrement. And if the button decrement is invoked, it will call the decrement function. And instead, if the increment is called, then we'll do an increment. Oops. We'll call here increment. Increment. Everybody good? Okay. Notice that I could pass it a state for the count. Right? It would render 1, 2, 3. Right? I can hard code it, but that's not what we want, right? We want the reducer to pass it its data. So let's do that first. Right? Let's do that first. So we get to practice. We're going to do exactly the same thing we did earlier. Right? We're going to wrap this in a container, right? And it's going to receive the state from a reducer. Okay? So perhaps we could do an initial state. We can say let initial state equal to count equal 1, 2, 3, say. Okay? And we want to feed that count to the state, to the property, the counter property. Okay? So the reducer might look something like this. So it might be const reducer, a function that takes as argument the state. And what does it do with it? Right now, it's just going to return the current state. And the state is going to have as initial value the initial state. Yes? And we need to feed that state to the counter. Okay? All right, so how do we do that? Well, we need to provide the store to our application. So let's create a store. So we can create a store. So we say let store equal create store with a reducer. So the reducer is going to generate all the states and put them in the store. But we don't have create store. We need to import that from the base, from the core Redux library. Okay, so we create the store, and now we need to provide that store to our application. Okay, so let's do that. We'll create a provider. We'll say provider store is equal to our store, and it'll be provided to our component. But we don't have provider, so let's load the provider. The provider is the glue that tries to glue Redux to React. Right, so we'll load the provider here, provider, from React Redux. Okay, so it's going to provide the store to our component, and then we need to extract from the store that contains the current state. We need to extract what? We need to extract the count in the state, and we need to map it to the count property. So we need a mapper, right? We need a container that does the mapping. Yes? Right? So let's do that. Let's wrap our component inside a container. So this will be a counter container. It will be connect. So this is const counter container connect, and connect takes the component counter container component as an argument. There it is, right? And the counter container is what we're going to render here, right? Instead of the component, right? This is going to complain saying that we don't have connect. So let's declare connect. Connect is also part of the glue between React and Redux. All right, we're still there. So okay, so it is providing the entire state, but it's not grabbing the counter in the state and mapping it to the counter provider property. So let's do that. So we need one more thing. We need the mapper, right? We need the const state to property mapper that takes, it's a function that takes a state and it just returns a JSON object that says how to map the two worlds from the state to the property. So the property count, right? This property. Where do we want to grab it from? I want to grab it from the state.count. Yes? Okay. And so now we have the property mapper, and we can use it here in the connect and provide it as an argument. There it is. Right, there's our 1, 2, 3. Right, that 1, 2, 3 come from the state. Right, the state's count. Everybody okay? So if I change the initial state to be something else, 2, 3, 4, then that is 2, 3, 4. Right, well, we have the initial state. The reducer is providing that state. Everybody okay? All right. All right. So let's now look at how do we go the other way around, right? How is it that the counter is going to notify the reducer that I want to increment this or decrement this. I want to change the state. Sorry, not change the state. I want to generate a new state. Okay, presumably either to 235, 236, 237 if I click on increment, or the other way if I click on decrement. Now let's do that next.